Some places we sense even before we get to know them. It's not just the landscape, the weather, or the history. It's a kind of vibration in the air, a presence you can't quite explain. When someone decides to venture into one of these forgotten corners, they never really know what they'll find. It could be just imagination or maybe something more. That's how it went for the person who wrote me this first account. Good evening, Dom. I've always enjoyed visiting new places, especially those brimming with history, where every corner seems to have a story to tell. But this time, my experience was different. I'm not sure how to put it into words, but there are things we feel even if we don't fully understand them. I thought it was worth sharing this story with you. The bus ride to Mount Seraphim was long and winding, the kind of trip I was looking for. I needed inspiration, or as I like to say, I needed a jolt to wake my writing projects back up. I had no idea what awaited me in this small town nestled among forested mountains, which, according to old brochures, was steeped in stories no one could fully explain. When the bus finally stopped at the tiny local station, I noticed a slight fog hovering over the old cobblestone streets. It was late afternoon, and a fine drizzle kept falling. I stepped off with my backpack and a rolling suitcase. There weren't many people around, an older man napping on a wooden bench, 2 women in headscarves chatting in a corner, and the bus driver, who waved at me before heading off to the next destination. I walked through the small covered area of the bus station, aware of a few curious glances. Nothing overt, but enough to make me feel a bit out of place. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and started down the main street, lit by old lampposts that buzzed and flickered. From my notes and a quick online search, the best place to stay in town was said to be the Ramirez Inn, an old family-owned building that supposedly still held the air of an ancestral home. With few tourists and a quiet charm, it seemed perfect for someone like me seeking a tranquil spot to write. When I arrived, I was greeted by a 2-story house with brick walls partially covered in ivy. A hand-painted wooden sign read, "Ramirez Inn." I pushed open the glass door and heard a little bell chime somewhere near the entrance. "May I help you?" Standing behind a dark wooden counter was an older gentleman, perhaps in his early 60s, wearing a simple vest. "Good afternoon, my name's Marina. I reserved a room for a few days." "Marina?" "Yes, here you are," he replied, scanning a time-worn ledger. "Welcome to Mount Seraphim." He handed me a key with a worn metal keychain. "Your room is number 9 at the end of the hallway on the left, 2nd floor. We don't have an elevator, so I hope you don't mind the stairs." I nodded and made my way up. The walls were lined with framed photographs, groups of people in old-fashioned clothing, some in black and white. Serious faces, period dresses, a few priests, elderly women with shawls. They all evoked another century. My room was simple and clean, a double bed, a wooden wardrobe, a small desk that I could use for writing, and a window overlooking the town's main square. I set my backpack on the bed and went over to the window. Outside, the drizzle was getting heavier, shrouding the distant trees and the outlines of what looked like very old structures, maybe ruins of something bigger. My first instinct was to learn more about the place, but I was tired from the journey and decided a little rest would help before exploring. I took a quick shower and went downstairs to ask Mr. Ramirez about where to eat. In the inn's lobby, I noticed a small lit fireplace in the corner, flanked by 2 armchairs that seemed to invite conversation. Mr. Ramirez caught sight of me and, without my asking, said, "If you'd like dinner, we have a small dining area in the back, but don't expect a wide menu. Tonight it's vegetable soup and homemade bread." He gave a somewhat reserved smile. It sounded good enough to me. I thanked him and headed to the dining area, which was empty except for a woman in an apron who looked like the cook or an assistant. I sat at one of the tables and soon received a bowl of steaming soup. The quiet was palpable. Only the clink of the spoon against the bowl broke the silence. After eating, I went back to the lobby and decided to strike up a conversation. "Mr. Ramirez, what is there to do around here? I heard the town has plenty of legends and old buildings." "Oh, there's no shortage of legends, but not everyone likes to talk about them." "Why is that?" "Some folks think those stories are still wandering around these parts," he said with a shrug. "If you walk to the end of the street and turn right, you'll come to the ruins of what people call the House of Gold, an old estate owned by a wealthy family. They say the family didn't come to a good end. It might have just been a local myth to intrigue visitors, but I sensed something in his expression, like Mr. Ramirez had revealed more than he intended. The way he avoided my gaze suggested real discomfort with the topic. I went upstairs, trying not to build up too many expectations. I opened my notebook and started jotting down my initial impressions. The sound of rain drifted in from outside, but occasionally I thought I heard footsteps in the hallway. When I checked through the door, no one was there. Though exhausted, I was excited to explore the town. I turned out the light and lay down. That's when I felt a slight vibration at the window, as if the wind was shaking the glass. It would have been nothing, if not for the unsettling sense that something was watching me. I considered getting up to double-check the curtain, but decided against it. Maybe I was just tired and overly imaginative. I rolled onto my side and closed my eyes. The next morning, sunlight streamed through a gap in the curtain. It was past 8, and I could smell freshly brewed coffee from downstairs. Hungry, I went down to the lobby, where I found Mr. Ramirez talking to an older woman. He paused his conversation as soon as he saw me. "Marina, good morning. This is Mrs. Francisca, our local historian. She knows all about the old records and legends here." The woman, short with white hair pulled back in a bun, smiled politely. "Pleasure to meet you. Mr. Ramirez told me you're interested in old stories, legends. I can show you some things from the small archive I keep at the city library," Mrs. Francisca offered. I nearly jumped at the opportunity and thanked her immediately, hoping she could point me to interesting sites without the risk of following exaggerated rumors. We headed over to the library, a low stone building filled with dusty books and old documents, maps, and photographs. With deliberate care, she led me to a large table and placed 2 photo albums and a register from the early 1900s on it. Mount Seraphim didn't always go by this name. It used to be called Cedar Hollow. But after the Contreras family settled here, the name changed. Legend has it that the patriarch, Mariano Contreras, built the House of Gold to showcase the wealth he'd amassed from mining and other businesses in the region. She pointed to an old photograph. This is Mariano standing next to his wife. I studied the faded image, a tall man with strong features, a thick mustache, and a determined stare. Beside him stood a woman in a dark dress, her expression almost blank. They had a few children, but something happened. There are accounts of strange rituals, animal sacrifices, things folks around here still don't like to discuss. The estate was pretty much abandoned after they died. A chill ran through me. It was hard not to connect this to what Mr. Ramirez had hinted about, stories still roaming around. And now the house is in ruins? Yes, but parts of the foundation and a few rooms still stand. People sometimes report seeing lights or shadows there, she said, looking serious but not trying to sell me on any cheap scare. You can see for yourself, but be careful, the structure is unstable. I thanked Mrs. Francisca for her help and decided I would head out to see the House of Gold in the morning. It was already late afternoon and the light was fading. Back at the inn, I had a quick dinner, rice, beans, and a simple but tasty chicken stew. I chatted briefly with a couple also staying there. They were just passing through, not interested in local legends. Eventually, Mr. Ramirez approached. "If you take a walk tonight, don't go too far. The dirt roads get slippery in the rain, and some townspeople say there have been folks roaming the area. Not sure they're all well-intentioned." His warning felt vague, but I appreciated his concern. I headed to my room, and after jotting down some ideas in my notebook, I turned out the light. Sometime in the night, a muffled thud woke me. It sounded like something had fallen in the hallway. Worried someone might be hurt, I opened my door. Everything was dim, lit only by a flickering light overhead. I called out softly, "Hello?" but heard no reply. I went back inside, and as I was closing the door, I felt a cool draft brush past me, as though a pocket of cold air had just swept in. I looked around, saw nothing, and locked myself inside. My heart was pounding, not from a clear sense of danger, but from the discomfort of that sudden, eerie feeling. Eventually, I dozed off again, though my sleep was restless and filled with strange dreams. I woke up early and, determined not to be spooked, put on sturdy clothes and grabbed my backpack. I was off to see the House of Gold. The route led along a dirt road skirting a small wooded area. Moss-covered rocks dotted the roadside, and I could see tendrils of fog drifting among the trees. As I walked, the temperature dropped. The sun was hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, creating a somber mood. After about 15 minutes, I came upon what remained of a tall iron gate, overrun by ivy. One gate door had fallen to the ground, the other clung to a single hinge. I stepped carefully over dried leaves and broken branches. If the House of Gold had once been impressive, it was now a skeleton of its former self. Portions of the walls had collapsed. Windows were missing their glass, looking like empty eyes watching me. I paused at the entrance, imagining life in that grand house generations ago. I followed a side corridor where the roof still stood, though full of leaks. A musty odor filled the air. I noticed footprints in the dust, suggesting others had been here recently. Eventually, I reached a large room, a sort of hall. A broken stained glass window dominated the far wall, letting in diffused light. That's when I saw a peeling portrait still clinging to one wall. As I got closer, I could make out the stern face of a man, likely Mariano Contreras. An odd sensation crept over me, like the painting was following me with its gaze. It was just a damaged old picture, but my heartbeat quickened. Perhaps I was letting all these rumors get to me. Still curious, I walked on. In an adjacent room, I found pieces of furniture blanketed in dust. Each step set the floorboards creaking. The stillness felt almost suffocating. At one point, I could have sworn I heard a faint whisper, like someone calling my name from a distance. Marina. I froze. I tried to brush it off as the wind through the cracks in the walls. Nevertheless, an undeniable sense of unease washed over me. I finally decided to head out to the courtyard, the feeling of being watched growing too strong. Glancing back at the facade from the yard, even in ruins, the House of Gold had a haunting grandeur. I could almost see shapes moving behind those empty windows. I inhaled sharply and made my way back to the town, trying not to dwell on any paranormal possibilities. When I returned, I noticed a small gathering in the main square. A middle-aged man I hadn't seen before was arguing with some locals. His voice rose above the murmurs. "I'm telling you, I saw lights out there again, people walking around with lanterns or something, and I heard screams. Sounds like some kind of ritual." He gestured wildly, clearly agitated. Those around him tried to calm him down or dismiss him, but he pressed on. "Everyone's always said the Contreras family made a deal with the devil. Now someone's out there doing the same. You'll see." A chill went down my spine. Though I'd been alone at the House of Gold, I suddenly felt like an unwitting accomplice. I kept quiet and slipped away. Later that afternoon, still unsettled by my visit, I decided to check out the town chapel. People said it was a good place to find some peace. It was a simple white building with a small bell tower. Inside, I found Father Esteban praying. He turned and greeted me kindly. I introduced myself, mentioning how intrigued I was by the local law. He invited me to sit on one of the wooden pews near the altar. Stories about the Contreras family have circulated for decades. Many believe the patriarch used questionable methods to hold on to his fortune. Do you think it's true? I believe there are energies that cling to places scarred by pain, violence, or obsession. Whether paranormal forces or just lingering memories, I can't say. But I do know a lot of people experience unsettling things near the House of Gold. For a moment I thought of telling him about the whisper I thought I'd heard, but decided not to. Still, he added, "If you feel something is wrong, don't ignore it. There are accounts of people having terrible nightmares after visiting that place, and some say a few folks carry things home without knowing it." His last remark stuck with me. I thanked him and left a small donation in the collection box. As I exited, I felt the odd sensation of being watched through the chapel's stained glass windows, but there was no one there besides Father Esteban. That night began peacefully, but around 2 in the morning I woke up to a sound inside my room. My bedside lamp flickered as though there were an electrical issue. Heart pounding, I sat up. I nearly jumped when I saw a shadow by the window. It could have been just the curtain stirring in a breeze, but for a split second I was sure I saw a human silhouette. Every hair on my arms stood on end. I forced myself to get up. I flipped the main switch, flooding the room with harsh light. Suddenly it was just an ordinary inn-bedroom again. I checked outside. The square below was empty under the moonlight. No movement whatsoever. Despite being exhausted, I stayed awake for a while, reading to calm down. My eyes kept drifting toward the window, as if a part of me expected something else to happen. Nothing did. By morning, my nerves were frayed. I couldn't concentrate on writing anymore. The curiosity that first drew me to Mount Seraphim had twisted into an uneasy dread. After lunch, I spoke again with Mrs. Francisca at the library. Over a cup of herbal tea, I confided that I'd been feeling watched the past few nights. She listened gravely, not at all surprised. "You're not the first to say so, Marina. Honestly, if I might give you some advice, get away from Mount Seraphim for a while. Rest. We don't have many concrete answers about the House of Gold or why some people feel this way." I stirred my tea in silence, contemplating her words. Part of me hated the idea of running away, but another part, maybe the more sensible part, told me it wasn't worth risking my mental well-being. By nightfall, I began packing. I decided to catch the first bus out in the morning. A wave of disappointment battled with relief. I wanted to be braver, but I also wanted peace of mind. Around 10 at night, as I tucked my notebook into my suitcase, a sudden chill passed through me, accompanied by a strange smell. Damp earth mixed with something pungent, almost sulfuric. I looked around, searching for any source of the odor, but found none. Then the wardrobe door creaked and slowly swung open on its own. I inched closer, thinking maybe the hinge was loose. Nothing seemed off, yet my stomach churned with anxiety. I closed the wardrobe, exhaling shakily. For a few seconds, I had to force myself to believe I was alone in the room. But the sense of being watched was overwhelming. I couldn't sleep. I kept turning the lights on and off, paranoid that if it went completely dark, something would appear more visibly. Maybe it was just my imagination running wild. Still, every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps to me. Around 4 in the morning, a door somewhere in the hallway banged. I peered outside, worried someone might be wandering around, but saw no one. Dim lights cast shadows along the walls. Near the stairs, I caught a glimpse of what looked like a tall, translucent figure moving slowly. My eyes welled up with terror. I blinked, and it vanished. I couldn't tell if it was a trick of the light, my tired mind, or something real. I hurried back to my room and locked the door, my heart thudding. The remaining hours before dawn dragged on as I stayed wide awake. At daybreak, I brought down my bags. Mr. Ramirez was tending the small fireplace in the lobby. He gave me a faint, knowing look. "Leaving so soon, Marina?" "Yes, I was able to move my travel plans up. Thank you for everything." He didn't try to convince me to stay. He just offered a subdued nod and said, "You did what you could. Sometimes this place just isn't for everyone. I hope you'll be all right." I nodded, paid for my stay, and said my goodbyes. As I walked toward the bus station, I took in the old houses, the lingering mist, the overcast sky. The cold air pierced through my jacket, sending one last shiver down my spine. Once on the bus and finally leaving Mount Seraphim behind, I tried to make sense of everything. Maybe it was just exhaustion, the gloomy setting, and those eerie stories preying on my imagination. But I couldn't dismiss the noises, the wardrobe door opening on its own, the perpetual feeling of being watched, and that figure in the hallway. I can't say for sure how much of the Contreras family's past and their rumored rituals still clings to that place. All I know is that after this trip, I carry a disturbing certainty. Sometimes the line between what's real and what's imagined is far too thin. If anyone asks me whether I believe in hauntings or malevolent presences, I'm not sure I could give a definite answer. What I do know is that in Mount Seraphim, I felt a peculiar blend of fear and fascination. And to this day, I avoid thinking about that apparition I thought I saw by the stairs on my last night there. Before we move on to the next story, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to get the latest stories. Your presence means a lot, and your support is essential. All right, let's keep going. I used to work at a large 24-hour supermarket in a medium-sized city here in the United States, which I'd rather not name. Back then, the chain still operated around the clock, not yet cutting back its hours due to economic struggles or the pandemic. For me, it was both convenient and exhausting. I worked the night shift, starting at 10 in the evening and clocking out at 7 in the morning. Although it was incredibly tiring, I had no other choice. I needed to provide for my son and keep up with the rent. During the weekdays, I also had a part-time job in the afternoon, which meant I barely slept. Still, I did it so I could take my son to school in the morning and pick him up in the afternoon. Sometimes my schedule was pure chaos. If my alarm went off and I wasn't alert, I risked missing the time to drop him off at school or arriving late at the supermarket. During that phase, I practically lived on coffee and energy drinks to keep going. My night supervisor, Joel, even joked that I looked like a zombie. This supermarket was huge. It didn't just have a grocery section. It sold clothes, electronics, toys, a massive variety of stuff. At night, only a few employees worked out on the main floor. Up front, there was usually just a single self-checkout register open, monitored by one lonely associate. Toward the back, near the stockroom, a few people handled heavy or frozen products, each minding their own section with little interaction. And of course, there was the night manager on duty, who occasionally strolled around the store to make sure everything was running smoothly. I remember one chilly, windy night. I arrived exactly at 10. There were still customers wandering around, some families doing their weekly shopping. Normally, around midnight, things would get pretty quiet, which I actually enjoyed. But right after midnight, I began to notice a guy who caught my attention. He had curly hair and was carrying a black backpack that seemed stuffed with something. Maybe clothes, I wasn't sure. I'd seen plenty of odd customers in that job, but something about this man unsettled me from the start. At that moment, I was in the cereal aisle. My job was to restock boxes of flakes, granola bars, and so on. Suddenly, I noticed him walking by very slowly at the entrance of the aisle, then turning around to stand at the far end as if he were pretending to look at the products on the shelf. He kept his gaze on me for a few seconds, and I felt awkward. When I looked back at him, he quickly looked away and started fiddling with the granola packages. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I tried to keep working. He then approached me slowly and asked where the sliced bread section was. I pointed him in the right direction, and he shuffled off, limping slightly. It crossed my mind whether he might need help, but he disappeared from the aisle quickly. I tried not to overthink it and got back to my tasks. However, about 10 minutes later, he showed up again at the end of the aisle. I pretended not to see him, but I sensed he was watching me. Every few minutes, he'd pass by again, as though wandering around the store without actually picking up anything. Not bread, not cereal, nothing. It made me uncomfortable. I decided to finish that aisle as fast as I could, then grabbed my empty cart and went to the stockroom in the back to fetch more items. On purpose, I chose to move to a more distant area, the chips aisle, which was almost on the opposite side of where I'd been. I thought, surely this guy is gone by now, or at least he's lost track of me. But I was wrong. There I was, organizing the shelves and checking expiration dates, when I felt someone staring again. I glanced to my side, and at the end of the aisle I saw the same man standing there, this time not even trying to hide it. He still had his backpack on, and he wasn't holding a single product, like he was roaming the store just to find me. My heart started pounding. Late at night, the store could feel eerily quiet. I tried to focus on straightening the chip bags, but he soon came closer. He remarked that I was too pretty to be working such a shift, and asked if I ever felt lonely. I forced a smile, feeling uneasy, and said I was fine. Then he started asking a bunch of personal questions. Which part of town I lived in, whether I had a husband, if I spent a lot of time alone at home. With every question, I answered vaguely or made something up, because I knew he didn't need that information. He insisted I give him my phone number. I said I was seeing someone and couldn't just hand out my number to anyone. He then claimed it wouldn't matter. We could just be friends, that I seemed like a nice person. To cut things short, I gave him a fake number. He flashed an odd smile, nodding his head like he still sensed some opportunity. Then I told him I needed to get back to work and pushed my cart away, hoping I looked too busy to keep talking. I figured that with my number in hand, he would leave. More time passed, and I thought I was finally free of that discomfort. But around 2 in the morning, I heard my co-worker Paula call me on the walkie-talkie. "Hey, you're in the chips aisle, right? There's a guy here in the drinks section asking for you. He seems kind of off. Says he wants to talk to you." My stomach twisted. I asked her to say I'd already gone home or was busy in the stockroom. I wanted to avoid another confrontation at all costs. That's when I decided to hide in the employee break room, a simple area with a table, chairs, and some lockers. I figured at least there I'd be out of sight until he gave up and left. The moment I stepped in, I dropped into one of the chairs, trying to catch my breath and figure out how to handle this. Unfortunately, less than 2 minutes passed before the double doors swung open, and he barged in. He pushed through them forcefully, as if he already knew exactly where to find me. His face was twisted with anger, and he practically yelled, "What the hell? You gave me a fake number," and I felt my blood run cold. I stood up slowly, trying to keep my composure. "You're not allowed to be in here. This area is for employees only." He took off his backpack and placed it on the table, starting to unzip it without taking his eyes off me, like he wanted to show me whatever was inside. I didn't wait to find out. I jumped up, tried to slip past him. He attempted to grab my arm, but the adrenaline helped me break free. I dashed down the store aisles toward the main exit. I didn't even think about finding the manager or security. I just wanted to reach my car. It felt like every instinct was screaming at me to get out. While running, I noticed he was trailing behind but moving slower, maybe because of that limp or something else. I don't know. All I know is I managed to jump into my car first and lock the doors. As soon as I shut the door, I saw him emerge from the building. He spotted me, but it was too late. I started the engine and sped off, shaking so badly I could hardly grip the steering wheel. In my rearview mirror, I saw his furious expression mixed with something like disappointment. Once I was a safe distance away, I grabbed my phone and called Joel, the night supervisor, telling him what had happened and how I didn't feel secure returning to the store. At first, he was upset I had abandoned my post without notice, but when I explained the man seemed aggressive and might have something dangerous in his backpack, his tone changed. He promised to call the police, check the security cameras, and make sure that guy didn't get back into the store. Even so, I asked to stay off the job that night. I was in no mental shape to finish my shift after such a scare. The next day, calmer, I went back to talk to Joel. He showed me the camera footage. It clearly showed the man walking through the aisles, always focusing on me, and then barging into the break room. You could see me rushing out right after. Joel said he'd hand everything over to the police as the man's behavior was obviously threatening. I never heard anything more about him. Since then, I haven't been able to shake the feeling of being hunted by that guy. I continued working there for a while longer and encountered plenty of odd customers late at night, but nothing that ever compared to that incident. Sometimes I catch myself wondering what he really had in that backpack, or what he might have done if he'd managed to hold on to me in that room. Maybe it was harmless, but the way he stared at me, it still gives me chills. Afterward, the supermarket eventually changed its operating hours, probably for other reasons too, but I could never separate the decision from the lack of security during the night shift. Today, I work a different job with more normal hours, but every time I step into a grocery store late at night, those memories come rushing back. His pursuit, that furious look in his eyes, and that backpack unzipping in front of me. It's all burned into my mind. I'll never know for sure what he intended, and maybe that's for the best. I have a story that didn't happen directly to me, but to my grandmother, Selma, back when she was very young. She was always a strong woman, but she carries a deep scar because of what she went through many years ago in downtown Chicago, in a rundown tenement that doesn't even exist anymore. People said it was on a narrow alley near the old train tracks. After separating from my grandfather, she was left with few resources and, with only a handful of furniture, moved into that cheap place. She arrived there with her 4-year-old daughter, Louise, who would become my aunt. For the first few days, life was relatively calm. The room they rented was tiny, with stuck windows and a musty smell, but at least the landlady didn't charge too much. There were 2 other women renting rooms downstairs, all around my grandmother's age. It was a simple place, a narrow hallway, a shared area for doing laundry, and a small communal kitchen. My grandmother worked as a seamstress in a local factory during the day, and left Louise with her younger sister, who also lived nearby. It was after 2 or 3 weeks that strange things started happening. Louise began talking about chatting with someone my grandmother couldn't see. At first, she thought it was just an imaginary friend, something common for a child who spends a lot of time alone or away from her mother. But the girl's insistence raised curiosity. Each day she'd bring new details about this invisible person. One afternoon, Louise came home excited after a walk with her aunt and said she wanted to hurry back to talk to her new mommy. My grandmother found it odd and asked who she was talking about. Louise answered with a child's innocent tone that she had two mommies, her real mom, my grandmother, and another one, who appeared when everyone else was asleep. She also mentioned that this mom cried softly at night and said she missed her own child very much. My grandmother still believed it was all make-believe, but one afternoon off, while she was sewing at home, she heard Louise babbling in a corner of the room. She approached unnoticed and had the impression she could hear a second voice whispering. At that moment she asked, "Louise, who are you talking to?" Louise, completely calm, replied, "It's my other mommy. She said your finger is hurt because you pricked it with the needle, right?" My grandmother was startled because moments earlier she had indeed pricked her finger while sewing a torn uniform. She hadn't mentioned it to anyone. That realization gave her chills. That same night she couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning she heard noises in the kitchen area. Sounded like a woman's soft voice mixed with Louise's quiet chatter. Trembling, she got out of bed and, careful not to make noise, went to the door that opened onto the hallway. From there she could see through a small gap. Louise was sitting on the floor, stroking the hair of a female figure. The woman kept her face tilted down, almost hidden, but it was clear she wore a very light-colored dress, and her arms were so pale they almost reflected the dim light coming in from outside. My grandmother froze. She wanted to run and grab her daughter, but fear paralyzed her. The woman whispered something and Louise stood up quickly. That was when she came face to face with my grandmother, who was still peeking. Frightened, the little girl only said, "Mommy, she wants me to go live with her, but I don't want to. Ask her to leave." In a burst of courage, my grandmother turned on the light and yelled, demanding that that thing vanish and leave her daughter alone. The neighbors woke up and came to see what was happening. They found the two of them huddled together, my grandmother almost voiceless, shaking and crying. The next day, while washing clothes in the shared wash tub, an older neighbor, curious about all the commotion, asked her for details. When she heard the story, she went pale. She then told my grandmother that years before, in the same room where she was staying, a young woman had lived there with her 4-year-old daughter. The child's father was violent and beat them so badly that the little girl died in the hospital. The mother, devastated by her loss, ended up taking her own life right there, overdosing on pills one rainy night. The landlady found her body days later when she realized the woman wasn't coming out of her room anymore. After hearing this, my grandmother packed up and left the place soon after. She was terrified that the other mommy would keep following Louise. Unfortunately, 2 years later, in another tenement, Louise was found lying on a staircase. No one could explain how she got out of the room in the middle of the night, but my grandmother says that on that same night, she had a dream of the same figure in a light-colored dress calling out to her daughter through the window. Even now, my grandmother can hardly talk about this without getting emotional. She believes that woman never got over losing her own child and somehow wanted to adopt Louise. Whether it was truly something supernatural or just a series of tragedies, I can't say, but the look on my grandmother's face whenever she talks about it leaves no doubt. Some wounds never heal. I still get goosebumps every time I think of that story, and I confess I wonder if there are echoes of that phantom mother still wandering somewhere in a forgotten corner of old Chicago. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Click the notification bell to stay updated on all future narrations. I post new videos here every day. I hope to see you in the next one. On the screen now, I'm leaving 2 other great videos I know you'll enjoy. See you there.